Hello Internet, Taliesin here, and today we are talking Vampire Bitey Boys. We are talking Garrosh Hellscream, and we are talking one of the big baddies of World of Warcraft Shadowlands expansion, because this, ladies and gentlemen, is our cinematic deep dive analysis of the 4th Afterlives animation, Revendreth. Apologies if you're still on tenterhooks waiting for the Ardenweald one. Last week was a little bit crazy with family visiting and getting the new weekly reset ready. I am going to try and get it done eventually, but I am also going to talk about it a bit today as well, because I think it's very relevant. And of course, Revendreth being the 4th and almost certainly last in the series, it gives us a chance today to look at all the shorts in contexts with each other too. But usual disclaimer, if you haven't watched the Revendreth cinematic yet, then this video is a terrible way of doing so, because we're going to be stopping and starting and repeating bits and skipping bits and talking all over it and generally just having a splendid deep divey time. Obviously there will be Revendreth and general Shadowlands spoilers, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, then join us as we try and get under the skin of Afterlives Revendreth and ask, why is this covenant so different from the others? Who is really in control? How long can the Garrosh battery last? And can we expect a surprise raid boss appearance? Okay, go, 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 go. The Afterlives cinematics have all followed a pretty similar thematic pattern for their opening up to this point. We witness the death of a major lore character in a famous moment from Warcraft history, who will then go on to be the protagonist, or in Ardenweald's case, feature heavily in the cinematic itself. And with that pattern firmly established going into this 4th Afterlives, Blizzard take the opportunity to undermine that pattern and change it in an interesting way. And this is something that we're going to see throughout the film, because Afterlives Revendreth, as we will come to appreciate, is a cinematic which is very explicitly about contrasts. So here, we see no character at all. Here, no speech. Instead, the atmospheric, echoey chain sounds and deep cries of agony and dripping noises combine with the lightning-style, scary environment being illuminated for a second or two effect to instantly pull on some pretty major old-school horror movie vibes. And this is doubled down on as we get a glimpse of a very gothic flaming torch and this descent down a winding staircase. Bastion was introduced to us soaring through the sky with literal castles floating in the clouds. Maldraxxus liberated us from reality and zoomed us all over a map to see everything. Our first sight of Ardenweald appeared as we swooped bird-like above the vast canopy of trees. In Revendreth, by contrast, we are almost literally descending into hell, certainly into something distinctly sinister, and unlike those first 3 cinematics where it felt like we were following the character that we'd just seen die to the afterlife, here there is more a sense that we are visitors, imposters maybe, paying someone who is already here, who has been here a while, a visit. And that straight away helps to establish a detachment for us, the viewer, to this cinematic that we're about to watch, and we'll see why that is important later on. I really like this shot of the cage bars here. Obviously, we know this is Revendreth, but these bars could visually easily be from the Maw or Torghast. You will actually go to the Maw before Revendreth in your Shadowlands gameplay experience, and if all you knew about the expansion was these cinematics, you could be forgiven for seeing the designs of Jailer's Covenant and thinking, huh, that's like the beginning of that Revendreth cinematic. So even within 20 seconds, Revendreth is being shown to have maybe more in common with the Maw than it does with the other covenants. And then the money shot of this opening, the big beefy orc boy being tortured by his Venthyr, jailers. There's a lot to unpack in this frame. Most striking is the image of the Venthyr themselves, who from the day they were first shown to us at BlizzCon have very clearly been modelled on the Nosferatu style of vampire. But this image goes beyond mere reference and continues the gothic horror movie vibe by going full on homage to arguably the original horror movie, 1922's German expressionistic masterpiece, Nosferatu, based on Bram Stoker's Dracula. trailer, because this is literally a pose that Max Schreck holds in the film. The design of the Venthyr, and of course the zone itself, is obviously very directly playing with cliched vampire aesthetics, which helps give this film a maybe unexpected level a little bit later. The central orc figure here is of course Garrosh Hellscream. The silhouette immediately suggests Garrosh. This pose in the chains is a very obvious echo of the War Crimes novel cover, and later on it's shown to definitely be Garrosh. So we're going to talk more about what that means then, but I said before that unlike the other cinematics, we don't see a character we know die in the opening of Revendreth, and that's true, but those purposely cheesy horror movie electrical lightning sounds, which help build the opening Frankenstein's monster horror vibe, the cinematic or game doesn't use those kind of sounds at any other point when you see Anima being drained. But of course that electric-y sound is associated with Garrosh's death, because he was killed by a lightning bolt when Thrall totally cheated at the Mok'Gara in Warlords of Draenor. The receptacle for Garrosh's anima here, which we know this red stuff is shaped like a face, which absolutely fits the gothic gargoyle aesthetic of Revendreth, but also makes it look like his anima is being fed upon. It's literally flowing into the gargoyle mouth here, a foreshadowing of a future revelation in this cinematic. And lastly, the chains. Chains, especially these square-shaped ones, are very important in Shadowlands in general. Obviously, they are a central theme in the Maw with the Jailer, so seeing them here might again make us subconsciously associate Revendreth with that zone. It's also reminiscent of how Sylvanas binds Bolvar down in her fight with him in the Shadowlands trailer, but this being a cinematic about contrasts, we will also see a clever inversion of this image and the use of chains a little bit later on too. Whew! And that was the opening 20 seconds. Don't worry, we'll go quicker from now on, because this is where the real fun of this cinematic starts.
To the good people of Revendreth, it is with optimism that I address you today. Though these are challenging times.
We open to the strains of a string quartet, and this above-ground shot of Revendreth itself, as we will come to see it in-game. And this is a cinematic about contrasts, so this comes directly after the stark horror of a torture scene. The quartet music is civilized and jaunty and refined to an almost pastiche level, and the image of Revendreth is idealistic. It could almost be a picture postcard publicity image of Revendreth to entice tourists, with its beautiful glowing sunset type sky, carriage in the foreground, trundling across cobbles, the majestic towers of the city glowing warmly with an abundance of anima. This is the public face of Revendreth. Because it turns out the idea of facades and having a public and private face is quite important too, and the contrast between how certain people in Revendreth present things and the real truth of what is happening is a main thrust of the entire film. It's really interesting how they present this speech. The rich and calmly authoritative voice that we hear is quickly established to be Sire Denathrius on his balcony at a skewed angle, which is a pretty standard way of suggesting villainy in media. I always remember how in the old Adam West Batman series, the interiors of the baddies' hideouts were always shown on like an angle like this. But otherwise, he looks pretty caring and kindly looking out over his kingdom. His warm, chocolatey voice addresses the good people of Revendreth with optimism. Ray Chase is the voice actor here, and he's obviously brilliant, and I love him, but his name always makes me think of Ray Purchase from Toast of London, and that kind of spoils it, so yeah, sorry for spoiling it. And how does this contrast with the other cinematics? Well, it's a pre-written speech. His positioning on the balcony when we first see him suggests a Caesar figure announcing something to his people, in contrast to the much more personal approach of, say, the Winter Queen, for example, who glides around the forest benevolently, checking up and communicating individually with her grove tenders. We see he is dictating it to a scribe, and this is really important because it is a performance, an outer voice. In every other cinematic, we follow a character directly or hear an inner monologue, and You don't generally lie in an inner monologue, but a literal political speech? Not so much. And it's another way to detach or alienate we, the viewer, from this zone and character in a way that the other cinematics worked hard to do the opposite of. And I think the team do an amazing job presenting this speech because they really do get the best of both worlds. This speech is being written down, so in my head I see it being printed multiple times and then literally nailed to walls around Revendreth for the citizenship to read on big scrolls like a Robin Hood wanted poster or something. But with these establishing shots of Denathrius dictating the speech, which I guess makes him a dictator, we get another recognizable effect. This turns into, for us, kind of like a dystopian 1984 style Big Brother announcement, which is a well-used trope in itself, of course. Most recently you've seen it in stuff like Fallout or Outer Worlds. The Doom Eternal trailer had a similar thing. Children of Men, the cruel ruling party making very civilized announcements about pretty barbaric topics, usually over an echoey tannoy or something, which we don't need because Denathrius' voice has that strange reverb quality to it anyway, and that serene classical music playing underneath only adds to the public service announcement feel of it all. And from here on in, this whole cinematic is just basically the team having as much fun as they possibly can, visually contrasting what Denathrius says with the things we see happen on screen. And it starts harmless enough.
Firstly, I assure you that our holy mission to help the most violent and wicked souls atone for their sins is and always will be our utmost priority.
We see one of the wicked and violent souls that he mentions, and the holy mission to help them atone for their sins plays out against the action of this huge anima container rising from the earth, and the ribboning red anima of this troll and his other evil buddies being drawn into it. And so I'm looking at this, and yeah, I'm sure this troll dude was really evil in life, but just visually, if I had to pick out who were the evil and violent ones here,
our rituals are effective. Our judgment keen, but fair.
it wouldn't be the guys chained down and helpless, it would be the vampire-faced guys with claws who are obviously taking immense and gleeful pleasure in the pain that they are causing him. And I love the wording here too, because it's just so corporate. Denathrius is about to enact a draconian political policy in this speech, but going by just his tone, he could easily be about to unveil a new iPhone model to his investors. All of this opening of the speech is very interesting because it gives us a pretty good outline of Revendreth's purpose in the Shadowlands. As we discussed in the Bastion cinematic, Revendreth is basically the last chance saloon for the very worst of souls.
We, Venthyr, remain committed to bringing eventual redemption to all who desire it. It is through your faithful work that even the most evil and prideful beings may ultimately be spared an eternity in the Maw,
where they are given that last chance to atone for their sins, in which case they will either become Venthyr and help others, or they might be moved up to another covenant more suited to their newly atoned soul. And personally, I believe that when the machinery of death is all working properly, no soul actually goes directly to the Maw, and instead everyone gets that one last chance in Revendreth. I think that's what the Bastion cinematic showed us when Devos felt the need to steal Arthas and make sure that he did go to the Maw. She couldn't take the risk that he would find redemption in this zone, even if it were millennia later. And if that's the case, then actually, in many ways, Revendreth is, if you think about it, the kindest, most generous and charitable of all of the covenants. Its main purpose is to give even the most lost of souls one last chance to change and find salvation. But there is that link between Revendreth and the Maw again. Souls go directly from the former to the latter. It's also kind of understandable why the jailer might be a bit pissed off with the rules here too, he being the only covenant that never gets any souls sent directly to him, receiving instead just the scraps that filter through from the Revendreth table. And that might be one of the reasons that he decided to just start taking the souls for himself.
Unfortunately, of late, the flow of such hubris-ridden souls has virtually ceased. And as a result, anima, our most precious resource, is in dwindling supply.
It's a really nice subtle narrative device to show this red substance flowing up to the container while Denathrius talks about anima, which confirms for us that this is what the red substance is. It's not blood, okay? And it links all of this back to something that we saw very starkly in the Ardenweald cinematic, this mysterious drought which is ravaging the Shadowlands. Of course, as we'll later find out, it's not mysterious to Denathrius though, because he knows exactly what's causing it, because it's him. It's also a nice reminder when he says, it's through your faithful work, that this speech isn't for us, the viewer, but for the good people of Revendreth. Again, we are being alienated from this.
Even we, the faithful who extract the anima, have not been spared the effects of this mysterious drought.
And this great shot of the poor and destitute Revendreth citizenry queuing up, paying their anima tithes to the Sheriff of Nottingham here, who nonchalantly inspects his fingernails while his Riot Cop Stone Gargoyle security detail keeps an intimidating eye.
Yes, we still have our old reliables, our workhorses. Yet I fear they will not be enough.
And I love the language there. Our old reliables, our workhorses. And cutting back, of course, to Garrosh, now confirmed to be him with the tattoos coming over his shoulders here. And it would seem, by Denathrius' words, that Garrosh is a soul that they rely on as a steady supply of anima, which would make him, essentially, a battery powering the Covenant. Which is fascinating for a number of reasons. A, it means that Garrosh is so badass that they can just keep on bleeding his soul of soul juice, and he will, over time, make more and more soul juice to squeeze out. Most souls can't do that. There's a bit in Revendreth questing where we go off collecting anima tithes from NPCs for Denathrius, and some of the characters that we take them from die. But Garrosh just seems able to pump the stuff out continuously, and all it costs him is eternal and unending agony. But why is Garrosh able to do this? Is his soul so bad or powerful that it just works differently, like an athlete who just naturally produces more testosterone than their opponents? Is it his sheer tenacity and force of will? We see the grim determination in his eyes between bouts of torture extraction treatment here, a stark contrast to how we see Uther's head bow in defeat at the beginning of the Bastion cinematic. B, who are the other workhorses that Denathrius mentions? And C, most importantly, it gives us our first real evidence that Denathrius is lying in this speech. Because if Garrosh is being kept specifically as a battery, it means that Revendreth is intentionally not doing its job, willfully not fulfilling its purpose. Because if Garrosh is being kept as a battery, then no one wants him to atone and move on and stop being a battery. And likewise, he's never going to get sent to the Maw and stop being a battery. Clearly, when Denathrius said,
I assure you that our holy mission to help the most violent and wicked souls atone for their sins is and always will be our utmost priority.
well, clearly it's not their utmost priority in Garrosh's case, because their actual priority is keeping him as a battery. And that situation reminds me of something else too, D, because I can remember another character that was kept in an artificial purgatory by a baddie to be used as a battery. Argus, the world soul of Velen's home planet, was kept from being born properly by Sargeras and used a lot like this to power essentially an accelerated demon spawn point until Sargeras needed him to fight against us, at which point he was born but kind of corrupted or damaged or incomplete for a raid fight. And you know, that makes me think, because of course we will fight Denathrius as the final boss of the Castle Nathria raid in 9.0, and we know the fight. It's a bit like Blackhand. It takes place on multiple floors, and you fall together to lower levels throughout. And it makes me think, wouldn't it be fun if there was a mythic-only phase to this fight, where there was just one last level that you fell to? And wouldn't it be interesting if that last level happened to be as low down as where we begin this cinematic? And wouldn't it be crazy if we all, Denathrius and your raid team, crashed in on Garrosh there and had to contend with him as an extra mechanic in the fight? I don't expect that to happen, obviously, but it would be really cool. But it's here that we move on to the most important part of the entire cinematic.
We are doing everything in our power to gather more anima, but Simply put, we must all, rich and poor alike, make sacrifices.
We get another contradiction between what Denathrius says and what we see, with rich and poor alike. Well, you know, I see some people in this picture that look poor, and I see someone who looks rich, and only one of them appears to actually be making a sacrifice, and it isn't the rich guy, you know? And by the way, why are there rich and poor in a Shadowlands Covenant at all? We've seen power structures and hierarchies in the previous zones, but never any suggestion that anyone really owns anything, let alone more than anyone else. And the implication is that without the drought, everyone would have everything they need. But then we get to the actual story of this cinematic, which is revealed as maybe the true horror behind the zone. And the music changes from our infomercial string quartet to a pressing and driving theme to indicate that.
For the greater good. Therefore, I have decided to implement a strategy of conservation and rationing, which should keep the anima flowing to those most in need.
Because as Denathrius talks about his new conservation and rationing program, we see where that scarce anima that he is collecting off of the poor and hungry is actually going, flowing downwards, but, you know, metaphorically, upwards to the rich. Denathrius' words, not mine. Dressed in furs and robes, straight-backed and strong, in contrast to the hunched and weak poor. When the literal life force of those taxed poor flows out of the opulent, ornate, and jewel-encrusted anima dispenser like water from a tap at will, it appears to even overflow from the rich Venthyr cups. Perhaps they told the poor that some of this anima might trickle down to them, but you know, what kind of an idiot would believe that? They smile, they laugh, they cheers to each other. This is a party or social gathering, and they certainly don't appear to be those most in need, as Denathrius refers to them. The red glow coming from the floor almost gives the impression that they could and have been happily spilling their anima, and it doesn't even matter because the tap is right there. And remember when I said chains were important? Remember the heavy thud of Garrosh's chains and his cries of pain? Compare that to the light tinkle of these guys' chains and the hearty cheer. Because this is the chain as jewelry, as fashion accessory. They even sound like coins of money as they clink together here. Basically what I'm saying is, whoever made this cinematic is not f***ing around and is not keeping their message very subtle at all. And this seems like a good point of any to bring up a very common way that vampires are traditionally used in metaphor. Bram Stoker's Dracula was mostly concerned with themes of madness, the occult, and general good versus evil. But obviously since then, there have been any number of reinterpretations of what vampires actually stand for. But one of the most widely used is that of the ruling classes, privilege, wealth, monarchy, and by extension, capitalism. And no, leave that comment button alone, because the monarchy are capitalists. They use their inherited capital as a mechanism to gain more wealth. And it's easy to see why, right? Dracula is a lord who lives in a big castle and literally feeds on the blood of the poor townsfolk around him. It's kind of an obvious comparison to draw. All this boring shit is relevant because this is clearly the specific interpretation of vampires that Shadowlands and this cinematic in particular really goes all in on. Honestly guys, couldn't you have just gone with sexy sex mad vampires? Everyone loves sexy sex mad vampires, and this video could have been a lot shorter and sexier. Here we have a ruler who caused the anima drought on purpose, ordering that the poor of Revendreth, those with the least anima, give their anima to those who already seem to have plenty. He calls them the most in need, but he means the most deserving. And this is the big reveal of the cinematic, that Denathrius is a straight up baddie who is lying to his own people, or at least
the good people of Revendreth,
who this speech is aimed at. These guys already know exactly what's going on. This careful corporate talk is to placate the needy masses, who Denathrius clearly gives zero shits about. And that's why the cinematic has worked so hard to alienate us, the viewer, is so that we can have this moment of revelation. We know now that Denathrius is explicitly lying to his own people and bleeding them dry, and that creates what's called a dramatic irony, which is where we, the viewer or reader, know something that the characters, in this case the good people of Revendreth, do not. In fact, we actually know something that our own Warcraft characters don't know either. When you first arrive in Revendreth in-game, you spend the first half of the story helping Denathrius and collecting taxes for him. And I'm sure many Blizzard staff might be able to relate it to their relationship with their own Denathrius, Bobby Kotick. And that's why, I don't know, it just feels a little bit on the nose. In a good way, I think, because who doesn't want to be Robin Hood, right? Who doesn't want to steal from these rich dicks and give back to the poor? Who doesn't want to go get Denathrius in the first Shadowlands raid now? And if this first part of the cinematic shows us Denathrius's calculating cruelty, then the end shows us his visceral cruelty.
In this manner, we will keep our people strong and our land healthy, despite the efforts of those who would use this crisis to further their own ends.
Just in case you still maybe thought there was any real greater good going on here, as one of the poor breaks away from the tithe queue and we see those same towers that we saw in the opening picture postcard image of Revendreth, still grand and warmly glowing with anima, but this time contrasted with the grim reality of everyday life in the zone, the crumbling buildings and infrastructure down on the ground. And as our would-be rebel approaches some destitute other Venthyr, it's unclear who these are. They could be family he's returning to, or needy citizens he intends to share with. It doesn't really matter. The important part of this image is that it shows us people do live like this in Revendreth.
And rebel against the frightful structures of our society.
And as Denathrius casts judgment on his own citizen, and the voiceover talks about the rightful structures of society, he isn't angry or sad. There's again a glee in his eyes about the cruelty he is about to enact. He enjoys it, and he clearly feels totally safe and untouchable, both because of his position as Covenant leader and because of his secret, very powerful friends in the Maw. Now compare that to the sadness in the eyes of the Winter Queen, because she feels Arelon's pain as her own. Interestingly, of course, in Shadowlands, it's Denathrius who is planning to rebel against the structures that are in place, breaking the machinery of death and helping the Jailer with his plan. And that is the real difference between Revendreth and the other Covenants. This is a zone whose leader and ruling classes are in league with the Jailer. All of the Covenants that we've seen are touched and endangered by the drought, but Denathrius and his circle helped cause it. And yes, also Denathrius is clearly a Dreadlord, or a Proto-Dreadlord, which you know already because you watched my video about it back in May, so we don't have to go over it again here like it's a new discovery.
Rest assured, we shall bring these miscreants to justice. With fairness and mercy, of course. I am, after all, nothing if not compassionate.
And as our poor boy is dragged out into the scorched part of the zone, where what seems to be holy light breaks through the clouds, which could maybe be connected to what Denathrius referred to earlier, their holy mission. But I personally like to think that it's the fallout of an Army of the Light attack on Revendreth at some point in their history. We know that the Void attacked Bastion in the past, and that Maldraxxus attacked a Legion planet, so that kind of cosmic war shit definitely goes down in the Shadowlands, and that might also help explain why there's a Naaru getting held captive in the Sanguine Depths. But whatever the reason for its existence, poor boy is cast out into it, once again proving the words that we hear Denathrius speak here completely false, because this dude is clearly not merciful or compassionate.
My loyal subjects, we are doing all that can be done to stimulate anima production and fulfill Revendreth's honorable purpose.
And as he takes an indulgent lungful of his anima goblet, even his scribe, Dr. Strange here, shoots a secret shitty side eye, because Denathrius really is a dick, isn't he?
Remain devout and resolute, and know that I will lead us all into a brighter future.
And the brighter future line is obviously a well-funny bants joke, because the image that accompanies it is our poor boy frying and sizzling in the light. But it does raise a question. What actually is the future that Denathrius is planning to lead Revendreth into? Because he's helping the jailer. The drought he caused is clearly decimating the more vulnerable parts of his own covenant. Is he hoping to just sacrifice his own covenant, Revendreth, to the plan and just move over to the moor with his besties? What exactly is in it for him? Questions I'm sure we will find the answers to later, but this video is now outrageously long, so I just want to finish by saying a bit about the Afterlives series in general. Obviously, I've loved it. I've made almost 2 hours of video about it, and that's missing one of the 4 cinematics out entirely. I think the thing I like most about it is how well they set up the storylines in each covenant ready for you to play through. I think that you as a player will enjoy playing through each covenant more for having seen them. And I love how different they all are too. Despite all being in the same style and essentially serving the same purpose, I probably could pick a favourite, but I don't think I could pick a best, because comparing them in that way is kind of useless since they're all trying to do something very different. I loved the huge lore bomb and nostalgia of Bastion. I thought Maldraxxus was genuinely exciting and slick and pumped me up for war, but mostly pumped me up for Draka. I loved Ardenweald and how it showed that the zone and its inhabitants all embody the nurture and love of the Winter Queen herself. Plus that genuine moment of kindness in giving Arelon the choice in what to do about Ursoc was genuinely heartbreaking to me, as was seeing the Anima drought really ravage a zone like we haven't seen elsewhere. And I loved this Revendreth cinematic because it basically didn't give a f***. It was just a bunch of people really going to town and having fun with their subject matter, and that joy transferred into the viewing experience. I've still got my fingers crossed for a secret, more focused 5th episode, even though I don't think it would be in this animation style. We'll talk about that some other time. For now, what do you think? Did the Afterlife cinematics get you hyped for the new expansion? Did they change the way you looked at the covenants, or help change your choice of covenant in the game? Let us know in the comments below. And thanks for joining us today. If you like this episode, don't thank us. Thank our patrons who give their actual real-life money to make all of our work happen. And guys, seriously, thank you, because without you, there'd be a whole lot less Taliesin and Nevertel. If you didn't like it, downvote the shit out of it. Remember, my name is Ray Purchase. No, Ray Chase. No, my name is Taliesin. From me and Nevertel and Nyrin too. Until next time, cheerio!